I just want to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you for coming with us today to our All About Occupations seminar. I'm absolutely thrilled that we have Kwaku with us today, who's going to be talking about towards seeing yourself differently, engaging imprisoned young men in occupation. Kwaku's going to talk to us, and after that, Eva's going to be asking Kwaku some questions that we're going to create. So please engage in the chat, because I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions to ask. So as we go through, please pop your questions in. And Sue Wheatley from the university is here with us, and David Haynes is here also. We'll collate those questions and we'll ask Kwaku those questions for you on your behalf. Okay, so again, thank you for joining us, Kwaku. I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself, and we're all really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucy. Yes, so welcome. Thank you all for joining me today. It's just, what the day is it today? Wednesday here, it's 4:05 or something like that. But yeah, thank you for joining me for this session, talking about how I engage some of the young men I work with in occupation in a prison setting. As you can see, that's my information and how you can find me online and all this, all the social media details on there if you want to ever contact me for any reason. One second. Move on. Okay, so the aims of the session today is for me to tell you about working with young people in prison. We're going to discuss about the power of using occupation in practice. Some of the influencing models that help me to facilitate some of these interventions, use of occupation-focused interventions, and lastly, we're going to spend some time listening to narratives and creative expression to capture self. Yeah, that's fine. So a bit about me. I don't know if many of you know me or don't know me. My name is Kwaku Agyemang. I am an occupational therapist. I graduated in 2018 after completing the 4-year in-service bachelor's occupational therapy course at London South Bank University. Prior to that, I was working as a sports technician in a learning disability assessment and treatment service, and also a mental health rehab unit. My first degree was in sports science. I really enjoyed that, and following that, I was unsure what I wanted to do. So I sort of looked at the health field, and I managed to find this job as a sports technician. I just fell in love with engaging people in sports and exercise as a route for them to look after their health and well-being. So since I qualified in 2018, I've worked in a prison. When I first joined my prison here, it was a young offenders prison, which is here in the UK is 18 to 21-year-olds, a male prison. But since I've been here over the last 5 years, the prison's actually changed from young offenders to now a Cat C training prison, as they say, which holds some young men, but mostly we have 21-year-olds and over, up to 60, 70-year-olds now. As you can see, my service that I work for is called Pathways, and it's a complex needs service, and it's part of the offender personality disorder network across the country, which are based in prisons and also in the community. You can see another picture of me holding a massive snake. That was part of our animal therapy sessions, which happens once a month here with the young people and men in our service. And it's one of the most enjoyable sessions that we do. And I just thought I'd show you this picture to symbolize actually engaging in different occupations that we can do in the prison setting. But before we really delve into it, I would like to highlight and acknowledge an awareness of the immense harm and trauma and stress that people in prison may have caused to their victims, and the type of occupations being accessed by the people in prison does no way intend to dismiss or minimize the impacts of offending and crime on society. I chose to come and work in this environment because I just wanted to work with people that are placed on the margins of society. It's very difficult sometimes to separate values that I have in my life to continue working with the men that I work with. But as a society, we choose to imprison people for breaking the law, should we say. And when we choose to do that, we have a duty of care to look after them as well. And that duty of care is again, is no way to dismiss the immense trauma and stress that the people who are imprisoned have caused to the victims. So working with young men in prison, there's a lot of things that we have to take into consideration when we're working with young men in prison, and a lot of the interventions that we do for young adults have to be adapted to consider what their developmental stage as well. Young men are likely to exhibit high levels of impulsivity. There's a high prevalence of developmental disorders. They often lack concentration, which is very, very evident during sessions, especially some of the men that I've come across in my service and my work in the prison. A lot of them haven't had that kind of formal education through university, through school and college. So sometimes they find it very, very difficult to concentrate on task and engage in group work and sort of issues like that. They tend to exhibit high levels of behavioral instability and disturbance, which is probably linked to some of the developmental disorders as well. And there's there's a high prevalence of neurodiverse disorders as well. Some experience relatively rapid fluctuations in levels of motivation and engagement, and that links into the lack of focus or the difficulty in setting goals, or actually the lack of different occupations of interest that they can engage in prison in general. Some demonstrate less ability to focus upon long-term consequences of their action. Again, as a young person coming into prison from a very, very young age, consequential thinking is not something that they may have developed as yet, coming into prison from maybe 14, 15, 16 years old. It's very difficult for them to realize some of the severe consequences of their actions on themselves and also on the society around them. There's a high prevalence of speech and language and communication difficulties as well. Again, that's linked to some neurodiverse disorders as well, plus educational level as well. A lot of the men that I've come across and worked with have had involvement with gangs and had crime involved in their lives from a very, very young age, which again puts them at different risks as well of safeguarding risks and just the type of life course that means for someone who wants to live a life of crime. Again, they lack the skills to manage adult transitions. Again, if you've been in prison from a young age, it's very difficult to be open up and explore the different areas of life in your community and your environment and experience different things that you might have to do to achieve adulthood, as we can say, which sometimes includes looking after yourself, being in relationships, forming relationships outside of your family, intimate relationships, social activities, sports, all these kind of things people don't tend to do or haven't tended to do it. So it makes them have limited skills in managing the adult transitions as well. They often have limited meaningful occupations and very few productive roles because they haven't been allowed to explore as much as they would like to, or the meaningful occupations that they do have are very, very restricted and often related to crime and money. They also, because of their age, they also experience hormonal changes which can affect their mood, and we see that quite a lot. So when people come to me when it was previously young offenders at 18 years old, and they're making the changes, they're growing up, their bodies are changing, you can definitely see that affects the mood as well. They struggle with long and unwieldy treatment interventions. So if you say that you need to be doing years therapy in their eyes, that's such a long period of time without any set end goal. And they really do struggle with that in my experience. They often do respond very well to the use of media and creative activities in therapy, and engage well with interventions which complement therapies such as art, music, drama, any type of movement-based activities. So again, young adult men have the usual struggles in articulating distress and showing signs of vulnerability. You know, the thought of being seen as vulnerable and in need of support is one that some of the young men I've worked with have difficulties in identifying with. They often comment that being vulnerable makes one look weak, and to appear weak in a very highly toxic, masculine environment like a prison puts them at risk, they say. This is where the use of these different approaches, like the relational model, is crucial, because it's important to build like a trusting relationship with the young people, and then to sort of allow.
This train is the service to Brighton, calling at London Road and Brighton. The next station is.
Sorry. Yes, as I said, the building the trusting relationship with the young person is very important, to allow them a safe and a therapeutic space for them to explore and express some of the difficulties they've experienced, like either currently or have experienced in the past. When we have our key work sessions, which are like one-to-one sessions, which is psychologically focused sessions, can sometimes be triggering for them in terms of having to think and talk about traumatic events in their life as well. And they can often disconnect, dissociate, avoid and minimize the impact of the distress that they might be experiencing. And they often have a poor use and structure of time and occupational functioning. A lot of the face-to-face talking can at times be triggering for them. So sometimes the doing of an activity together or with helps to ease this by taking away those intense feelings required to think about it. So, the power of occupation. This is a description from the WFOT, which was done in 2021, that in occupational therapy, occupations refer to the everyday activities that people do as individuals, in families, and with communities to occupy time and bring meaning and purpose to life. Occupation includes things that people need to do, want to do, and are expected to do, which is a quite broad description or explanation of what occupational therapy does and what occupations are in general. And in my service, the occupational therapy service offers an alternative and or a complementary way of assisting the young people to engage in the therapeutic process of the service, with the primary emphasis on a therapeutic relationship, which is done together in terms of engagement in occupation and purposeful activity, rather than a direct focus on the verbal and cognitive processes. So my service is very much a psychology-led service. A lot of the work that we do is psychologically informed. Obviously, I'm not a psychologist, but I've been very lucky to work in this environment and have the opportunity to learn many psychological techniques to use in my key work sessions. Our service requires all the clinical staff to engage in sort of like a generic psychological working approach, a little bit like a care coordinating role, but not like that at all. Because as well as doing all that kind of key working sessions with my caseload, I'm still required to obviously provide occupational therapy support and intervention as part of the service as well. And with that, I try to work with people in creating a shared description and an understanding of their patterns of doing. We then engage with the young men to identify and engage in occupations and purposeful activity, which is more, I would say, has the potential to facilitate more adaptive motivation of like some of the negative effects that they might experience, and also has the potential in itself to facilitate other occupations or other purposeful activities, which provides other opportunities for disrupt or to question some of the schemas they might be have of themselves. And when I talk about schemas, it's just how you view yourself in general, how you feel that other people view you, and what you feel your place is in the world as well. So thinking about some of the models or ideas that influence some of my work, I'm very much drawn to being, becoming, and belonging. And I know this has been worked on and revisited many, many times in occupational therapy from different angles. But this is something that I really try to hold on to when I'm engaging with the young men in my service. Another model that really, really does influence my work is the dark side of occupation, because when we speak to young men, we really, as an occupational therapist, I really have to understand the whys behind the engagement in those occupations, and then how we can then adapt those occupations to be more of one that is not going to cause harm or disrupt someone's life, such as committing an offence and eventually ending up in a prison setting. But for our focus on this one for now, becoming, and belonging, I think is quite powerful, because a lot of the young men that I've worked with in prison setting, there's always a sense of wanting to belong. They haven't found their place in the world just yet. As everyone in this presentation today, I'm pretty sure that as you've grown up over the years, you've tried to find different ways of belonging with people. You've made friendships, you've joined different clubs, you've done different things with different people, and you belong to probably several different groups or families or organizations, wherever it is. But a lot of the young men I've worked with, I've never really seemed to find their place outside of maybe gang affiliation or being identified as, let's say, like a sex offender as such. And you get identified and you get labels placed onto you, rather than people trying to understand actually where you actually, what you're trying to achieve by doing the occupations that you've been doing. So a lot of my focus in Pathway Service is trying to get the young men to belong, to find a community for themselves. And I tend to start with that first, rather than going from the doing aspect of it. Yes, the doing is very important, but in the grand scheme of things, we are always doing all the time. We do as human beings. We have to move our body. We have to engage let's say if you're in prison, you have to engage in the regime of the prison. So you have to do something. So you're already doing an occupation. It's the belonging that is always the difficult part of anything, because once you feel like you belong in any sort of group or setting, I think you then become. So this model, of course, it tells you to, not tells you, but it sort of follows a bit of a linear path, but I actually like to go backwards on it, because like I said before, if you belong, then you might find your way to becoming something that you never thought that you might have seen or become before in your life, if that makes some sense to you. It makes sense in my head most of the time, and I appreciate that. It's a quite complex area to think about, because working in prison is it's got its challenges, and one of the main challenges is that the prison itself, or the criminal justice system, holds the ultimate say in what people do and what people become and what people are being, if it makes sense. So one of the things that I was having a conversation this morning with some of my team, and I never knew, but apparently in psychotherapy they describe the prison service as the brick mother, which is that a lot of people are in prison are seeking that sort of caring and the belonging nature of it, but the prison acts as a brick mother. And when we talk about brick, we talk about it being very hard and very stern and very risk averse, and very much not allowing people to express themselves. It's very difficult to show any sort of emotion. So imagine you have the prison telling you this, but you're trying to show emotion. You're looking for that kind of belonging. You're looking to be cared for. You're looking to be looked after, but you're faced with constant that push and pull. Is going to be very difficult for you to have a sense of belonging, and then you might revert back to what you used to do before, which is belonging to a group of people who might believe or value crime and violence and offending behavior as a thing that will get them to become or belong to a certain type of group. One of the things about participation in this kind of model, or using this model as one of my go-tos in managing and facilitation interventions in prison, is that participation in activities with others in the community forms like an essential part of who we are, how we see ourselves in the world, and how we determine our place in the world as well. And this goes towards shaping our identity, like I've just mentioned before, and also structures our value systems. There's a lot of documentation and research around that what we engage in different activities is usually to meet some form of a need and also to produce some form of end product. And this reflects back to what I was saying earlier about how some of the young men that I've worked with in the past find it really difficult to engage in a long-term pieces of work, because they can't see the end. And sometimes when the end is definitely not tangible, they definitely can't see it as well. But for some of the young men that I've engaged with, their engagement in those criminal activities in the past reinforce some of the non-tangible products of the sense of belonging and the self-esteem that they might have been seeking at the time of the offending. So the big question to me as an occupational therapist and as a clinical member of staff in the team is, how do we use different activities and occupations to meet some of the needs that some of the young men were trying to achieve and the goals they were trying to achieve through their engagement in criminal activities. So another model that really influences my practice is the Good Life model, which was produced by Ward in 2002. So the idea behind the Good Life model is that as human beings, we all strive to meet similar goals in life, regardless of being incarcerated or otherwise. People's most important goals and how they go about achieving them can and will look very different. And this is influenced by many factors, such as people's culture, their family setup, their religious beliefs, and many more. Some people meet certain goals in unhelpful ways, which may include committing offences. So we use the Good Life model to assist and explore how some of the young people's behaviour was related to achieving their goals around the time of the offending. We also use this to reflect on these behaviours and think about how they can meet these important goals in a more socially, contextually appropriate and balanced way. So the overall aim is to then help the young person to live a more meaningful, productive, healthy, and an offence-free life. So some of the offending behaviours I have come across since working in this environment have been associated with adverse early childhood experiences, poor occupational functioning as they're growing up, impulsivity, like I've spoken about before, negative peer associations, limited education, use of illicit substances from an early age, limited boundaries from caregivers, and also poverty. Poverty always raises up in this about the socioeconomic status of their family and the area they were living in. I could argue that if help can be provided to the young person to assist him to understand the relationship between his early experiences and associated behaviours, improve their occupational functioning, improve the ways he esteems himself, enhance opportunities through education and training, and support him in building and maintaining relationships and developing a balanced structure and routine, we could see a reduction in offending, antisocial behaviour, and also emotional dysregulation. So we move on to occupation-focused interventions that I use. I I could talk to you about all the different things that we do in pathways, interventions that we do in pathways, but we might be here forever. So today I'm just going to focus on some of the creative activities and aspects of our program here in pathways. So using creative occupation-focused interventions can help the young men prepare for psychologically based trauma interventions like CBT, like EMDR. It encourages feelings of safety and support to be fostered. It aids in engagement and meaningful life roles, develops relationships and connections, and encourages mastery and learning of skills, promotes a better balance in daily activities, enhances self-esteem and confidence, and also encourages goal setting. Some of the psychologically based trauma interventions can require increased cognitive competence to process lived experiences. The effects of trauma can be far-reaching when not validated or processed appropriately. So engagement in occupation is one of the ways that people express their personal identities. Our identity provides a context for getting some meaning from our daily experiences and also for understanding this meaning over time. So our understanding our own identities will go towards providing some form of a framework for how and what goals we set ourselves, and also the internal motivation to accomplish some of these. And that's an important point for some of the young men, because sometimes they can't set goals, they're not really sure of what they want to do with their life because they haven't been able to experience a wide range of opportunities prior to their time in prison. And developing competence in performing different tasks and activities contributes to shaping our identities. And the majority of the young men in our care experience disruption in their education through expulsion or exclusion, with school being one of the main occupations for young people. A disruption to this will ultimately impact on their sense of self and also identity. Some of the men have experienced neglect, physical and verbal abuse, or emotional and sexual abuse as well, racism, poverty, displacement, been in care, or witnessed or experienced severe violence. These experiences can at times impact on their ability to process information, reluctance to engage or participate, avoidance of sharing emotions, and non-trusting of systems and services. And the prison in general, like I talked about, being a brick mother, can directly or indirectly reinforce some of these experiences that they've had in their past. And saying all this, that not all the occupation-focused interventions activities will be beneficial to all the young men. So the interventions have to be chosen with care, and also they have to have the meaning to the young man, and they should have interest in it and should be adapted to support their cultural beliefs and also values that they hold. So in order to increase participation and performance of the daily activities, particularly those that are meaningful to the young men, we have to focus the interventions around adapting the environment. Obviously, we can't change the prison environment. It's very, very, very tricky to do that because it's built for a purpose. So what I've done using the occupation-focused interventions is make small changes to the environment to my department, the department I work in, so that people feel like they are part of it, they own a bit of it, they belong to the setting. So we can also modify the tasks, and we can modify the tasks to fit the just right challenge for the young person, so they don't feel like they overly challenged or they don't feel like it's too easy for them to achieve. We do a lot of skill teaching as well, because like I mentioned right at the beginning, some of them lack skills in the transitions. And yeah, you can see some of the lack of skills into adulthood is often highlighted here. So skill teaching is a key focus on our interventions, and both it can be physically and also mentally as well. And education also plays a big role in this. So anything that we do has an aspect of educating the young people as well. And when I say education, I mean around understanding themselves better and the link between previous behaviors and also offending, and the move towards an offense-free lifestyle is very, very, very important to them, because ideally, once eventually they leave prison, you really don't want people returning to it, or actually when they're in the community, they can have access to different opportunities and live the life that they might want to live away from crime. So like I said, we're going to focus on some of the interventions that I've highlighted in brown. With that, some of these are used as the means, and also some of them are used as the ends of the work that we do in Pathways. So let's start with some of the creative tasks that we've engaged in. So as you can see the pictures on here, this is the art mural. This was a long-term project which was broken up into 3 different areas, and it was a collaborative project between the young people, occupational therapy, and also the art therapy department in the service. And the aim was to create big mural pieces for the department corridor. And the young people came up with the idea of having 3 different murals which represented the past, the present, and the future. So different young people along the way had input across the time that it was completed, and it's only just been completed earlier this year. From an occupational therapy point of view, we wanted to foster a sense of belonging to the Pathways community or the department by having something that they have done, taking a very much a prominent space on the walls. It also was a great opportunity for the young people involved to increase their routine. And I say this because a testament to this was that the group was held at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. So it required a commitment to the people who were involved in the project to turn up at 9 o'clock. And 9 o'clock for anyone, for me, it's hard. So to challenge yourself to wake up and be here and engage in a creative task in the morning on a Monday is something that we use to help people increase their routine and kickstart their week, really. It was also an opportunity for them to learn new skills from the art therapist when I talked about skill learning, and that is about scale drawing and painting and abstract representation of thoughts and feelings, because some of the difficulty some young men experience is having abstract thinking as well, in terms of their thoughts, because they have a very much a black and white view of how the world should be like. So quickly just run through it. So the first image on the top left depicts their past, which involved drugs and alcohol use, involvement in gangs, postcode wars, and living in the built-up cities, which often meant high levels of crime until their point of entry into prison. The second image represents their present time in prison, engagement with different services within the prison, and how it's an opportunity to unlock their potential. It also shows how lonely some felt at night and with only lights from the landings coming into the cells. It also shows how volatile prison can be in terms of violence, with the Aylesbury word written in red and with a splash of, if you look closely, it's got like a little splash of what they wanted to represent, blood and violence. The final image is the latest to be completed, and this is an abstract image depicting an unclear future. They spoke of how difficult it could be to completely remove yourself from your old life when your friends are still in it. They named this piece Crabs in a Bucket and submitted it to the Kosler Awards along with a song they made to describe and explain it. So the Kosler Awards is an arts organisation working with people in the criminal justice system and also mental health services. They actually won an award for the young persons under 25 category and were gifted money towards their prison spends. We're just going to have a quick listen to the song that they, 2 of them, produced for that piece.
Wait, 1-5 made this?
Two paths, choose one to go down. It's a rocky road, if you want it you could go down. Whatever path you choose, there's always ways back. Overcome your problems, it won't always be a straight map.
Why go through the system, chop off the trap or walk down the street, one eye on your back? One foot in, another one out, it's like you're limping. Soon you're gonna sink in.
Loose lips sink shits, breaking bare hearts and your friends turn to shipwrecks. Relations broken, a race like Tipex. Or choose the right way and you're gonna light a flame. Leading the ways for your friends at the trouble gates. Get that tunnel vision, focus what really pays. It's always better when you're not at the heaven gates. The hood will have you paranoid, thoughts are getting chased. And when you try to leave, the crowd's pulling at your game.
So that was the song that they produced for that, which was very, very impressive. Oh, I've jumped ahead. Quickly come back. So this one quickly, because I'm conscious of the time, it's the identity and me masks that I sort of introduced to the service. I introduced this to the service as a means for the young men to capture their identities, and we facilitated the sessions with the young men to achieve some of the final products. As you can see, my very fantastic OT assistant did a lot of the work after, obviously through guidance from myself, which is I think there's amazing pieces of work they produced. The young man who created the top mask, which is the blue one, I historically found it difficult to express his thoughts and feelings in his key work sessions, which is the face-to-face talking sessions. He was aware of these difficulties. On the other hand, he felt that there was always a lot going on in his mind, so he represented these thoughts with cogwheels in his mind, and he felt that he was slowly beginning to open up to people around him, and this is represented by the small door opening at the top of his head and his mind as well. The second image was created by a young man who felt a strong connection to his culture and heritage and was looking forward to being released in 2024. He spoke of wanting to form stronger bonds with family members on release, and this was represented with the ropes in the back of the mask. Some were looser than others, and these were connections he felt needed more work. It was really interesting sitting in some of these sessions and observing him tying those knots. We were aware that he had a diagnosis of dyspraxia, and one of the tasks he had always found difficult was tying shoelaces. He would become increasingly frustrated and at not being able to do it despite prompts and guidance from us. He reflected that back in school, prior to receiving a formal diagnosis, he would often become frustrated and disruptive in class due to not being able to complete different tasks that was required of him. And this would then lead to outbursts in class, leading to being removed from class and punished with detentions and eventual expulsion. He was able to recognize and appraise his current abilities of not giving up and becoming disruptive, even when he was finding tasks difficult. And this was, again, an insight to seeing him and himself and his identity differently. The last mask that you can see is a young man who wanted to depict his Rastafarian background. And through engagement in this, he was able to explore and understand more about himself and how he feels his engagement in the gang lifestyle in the past, which is represented by the bandana, as not aligned with the values he grew up with in his family in relation to his Rastafarian background. And again, all these masks, the three main ones that I've just talked about, we entered them to the Costa Awards, and again, they all managed to win, which is very, very good for them. Again, we have a gardening group, which is pretty impressive. It's probably one of the most popular things that we do in Pathways, and gardening has proved to be very popular with some of the young men. We had a very old